to that situation in specifically, because I have to admit I don't pay as much attention to Pro StarCraft now as I used to. But he is, you can judge his rating relative to the players he plays against the most.
Right. Okay.
And if he really does play a lot against Koreans, and he still is number 2, then you can, with reasonable certainty, say that he's pretty good, right?
Well, I definitely would say that even without any of that knowledge. But what I would like to, I'm just kind of curious to know is that when your data is collected, is it actually segregated by Koreans and non-Koreans, and then compiles like the rankings, as a holistic, or does it just say it doesn't matter and it's just the players themselves, the data themselves, they only play the Koreans, so it sort of segregates itself because of the fact that they're
there's no explicit segregation at all. Although, in order to resolve this problem with the Koreans having a too low rating, what we ended up doing was actually like giving every new Korean player more points to begin with than a foreign player.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Is what do you do when someone enters the pool? Do they start at non-Korean? Do they start at 1,000? Is that generally? Yeah.
Non-Koreans start at 1,000, and I think Koreans start at 1,200.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's completely dirty hack, non-scientific to the Korean power, but it seemed to be simply the best thing that worked.
Is that like, do you do that for like as a weighting kind of thing? Is that kind of like more of weighting their kind of wins or the type of wins they may or may not expect to play?
No. I tried doing that too. I tried saying, matches between foreigners and Koreans mattered more.
Right. That's what I would, like, in my immediate mind, that's what I'm thinking. Wouldn't you just like, weight the different players, like matches between them? If a foreigner plays a Korean and they win, that should be worth more, or in my mind, worth more if they play, a random foreigner.
Yeah, I tried doing that essentially to amplify the results. So if one foreigner played against a Korean one match, it would count as if he had played the same match like 3 times or whatever.
Right.
And it just didn't really help.
So I read on the site that there are 3 parameters that you use to like come up with your rating. But what I didn't see was what the actual parameters were.
Yeah, so this let me see. Yeah, so this gets a little technical, perhaps.
That's a good question. How deep? Let's chase this rabbit, and then if it gets too technical, I'll pull it back just in case. But I'm curious. My curiosity is piqued. I'm curious.
Sure. So one of the things we do is we track how uncertain the rating of a player is. So if a player plays very many games, the bell curve narrows, and we say we're reasonably certain that the player's rating is very like the player's true rating is very close to the number that's actually displayed on the website.
Right.
Whereas if he plays very few games, this bell curve is. One of the parameters is like there has to be a sort of a minimal, shall we say, narrowness. Like you cannot allow this bell curve to narrow to a point.
Right.
For someone that plays a lot. So there's a threshold there. That is one of the parameters.
Is the bell curve the plotting of the data of sort of victories over time or losses over time, or
it's the likelihood of their rank?
Oh, okay. All right.
I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. So a player like Maru, who has a rating of 2966 right now, that's just an estimate. It could be somewhere a little bit higher or a little bit lower, really. And there's a number that's not actually displayed on the website, but like hidden in the internals that says, how sure we are of this.
Right.
And that number is not allowed to go below a certain value.
And does that then impact? Maybe you're about to explain this. I'll just let you go.
Okay. The second parameter that I can remember is how quickly does this certainty deteriorate when the player doesn't play any matches over time. So there's a sort of a deterioration parameter there. How fast does this happen? That's another thing you can choose.
Where do you get that number? Like that number to me seems like it would be a very abstract number. Like how would you?
Yeah, and that's the thing. These are like completely abstract numbers. There's no, like a priori, there's no way to say like this is better than the other one.
Right.
So you have to sort of just play around with these numbers, see which one gives you a model that looks right, which one has the highest predictive power, basically, and then
right. And do you like? Does your I'm assuming like there's an algorithm. Does it improve and change over time based on the more data it collects on how close it was to predicting the correct response?
No, I picked these numbers once and I haven't changed them since.
Oh, really?
And that's a, fair point. I should probably. You could make a point that I should be reevaluating them.
I would imagine like over time, certain players would change, or like I'm assuming is this number individual or is this like a static number?
It's global static.
Okay, it's a global static number, so it's not a variable.
Yeah.
Have you ever taken, actually maybe an extension on that question, have you ever taken the inferences that it would have said for say a month and then seen how often it was correct or how closely it matched?
Yeah, when I originally did this analysis, I did actually do that. Like I did a sort of training test splitting of the data, and I said, given these matches, what parameters can I choose so that the predictions of the test data sets is best. And there are some plots on the website in the about section.
Yeah.
That show that up to about I think about like 80% or so. Or hang on, let me check.
Okay, so while you
actual versus predicted, how predictive is the system?
Yeah, so about if the predicted win rate is up to about 80%, it matches well with the actual win rate, and after that, it's God knows what.
Is there deterioration of that value over time? Like, will your ability to predict, since you're not actively, readjusting for any variances in like players themselves, will that deteriorate over time, or have you found that that has been consistent?
I haven't checked, but there's no reason to believe that these numbers should remain static over time. So we could hope so, but.
There's one thing I don't know if you've ever observed this, but I've always had it in my mind that certain matchups are more stable than other matchups. So,
like from a race perspective, or are you talking about like
exactly? So your system treats a TVT and a TVZ the same way it treats a PVP and a ZVP.
Ah.
A TVT, the better player wins. Period. Basically a TVT, that's basically going to be the case.
Wouldn't that be the same for a ZVZ too as well?
Well, no, right?
No.
Because you can rock, paper, scissors your opponent, say with a PvP. The rock beats the paper sometimes. So as long as the players are in the same ballpark, like a TVT, to win a TVT, you can't win a TVT with cheese, right?
Right, okay.
You have to position tanks for 20 minutes.
But what if the data says otherwise? That's what I'm curious. Like,
that's why I'm asking it. I want to see if.
Oh, okay. Because that's a qualitative assessment.
Yeah.
He has data, so I'm curious.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Have you ever noticed anything like that, or?
No, I haven't. Although I guess what you're asking, you could reformulate it the following way. Is it true that the mirror matchup ratings of Terran players has a sort of a lower variance than the mirror matchup ratings of Zerg players?
Yeah, that's what the way I'm thinking.
Wait, can you read? Could you say that one more time? I want to like make sure I process that. So,
so every rating has a variance, right?
Right.
So if the variance is low, that means we're pretty sure that the player is actually that good. Now you would expect in a volatile matchup like CVZ that a player which is 2500 or whatever could potentially perform on a 2400 or 2600 level pretty often, because the matchup is pretty volatile. So in other words, in a ZVZ matchup, you would expect that the system understands that the rating is less that the system is less sure about the rating.
So, but is that the case? Does the system weight those matchups like that?
No, it doesn't weigh the matchups.
Oh, sorry. Take the variance in consideration.
But you could check whether the system has managed to learn this property.
Okay.
Based on the results, which I haven't the slightest idea if it has. I haven't checked this, but
yeah, that'd be fun to check, because I've always assumed that that's true, but I don't know that it's true.
That is a very interesting question, Dave. I didn't even like it. That just sort of, for me, I just sort of took it as almost like a little bit of a gospel. And I'm sure many people also fall in that same trap as well. But there are a level of variances of matchups that I think would affect. And obviously that's because, it comes down to the point that the system isn't perfect.
Yeah.
Certainly.
But speaking of to that point, how accurate have you found it been able to predict I know you've said on the site that you found it very accurate to some point, but like currently today, how accurate is it to predict the probability of a player winning in a certain matchup against another player?
It's hard to say. It's really hard to say.
Yeah, of course.
I haven't run these numbers, but I guess I would say if the probability predicted is close to 50%, let's say between 30 and 70.
Yep.
I would put my faith in those numbers. If it's a lot higher or a lot lower, that's probably just junk data.
Really?
Yeah, or I mean, it says that a player is a lot better than another player, and if the skill gap is too high, it just gets hard to quantify, I think.
Yeah, and is it? Well, I guess that's it. It's the two things it's looking at, and I've always wondered how it kind of does this. Is it obviously looks at the ELO of one player, the ELO of the other player, and their race ELO. How much does it weight their actual historical score versus each other versus their actual overall ELO, or not at all?
It doesn't look at the historical score at all, actually.
Okay.
It just really?
Tells us that, but it doesn't care.
Yeah. So that's something that you as an esports bettor or a caster or whatever needs to take into account also, right? Because the system has no idea of psychological factors at all.
Right.
Huh. Now, Dave, you're much more learned in traditional sports than me, but do traditional sports ranking sites, statistical sites, take that into consideration from your experience?
Yeah, in sports they tend to, because you don't have this concept of an ELO or power of score for a team. So, and very often, particularly if it is a team sport or something, you've got strengths and weaknesses to that team, so that this matchup, like this football team is very defensive, this one's very offensive, this is generally what's going to happen, or this is a very tough team and this is a very whatever. Or like just recently, we're from Toronto, the Raptors playing the Cavaliers was a horrible matchup for Toronto because we've got literally no one on the team can stop LeBron and there's no other threats or something like that. So the way that the players line up against each other is particularly bad for the Raptors.
I'm curious, like, I'm talking as a completely traditional sports noob. Like, how does someone turn psychological factors into data? Like, how does that turn into like a variance or a variable that's calculated? Like,
I'd imagine it's beyond. Well, one, I think you don't care where it comes from, and then you just say what happened in the past is a predictor of what's going to happen.
Oh, I see.
I think because it's hard to quantify, the psychological.
Yes.
But it's easy to say here, and they'll do this in football a lot. They'll be like, this is the guy catching the ball. This is the guy defending him. That's the way it is. That's the matchup during this game. This guy sucks and this guy's good. So this guy's going to catch a lot of damn balls. And same with, like, obviously in this one, we're like, okay, the guy guarding LeBron is basically a rookie. This isn't going to go well.
And then, and then I imagine you can then, like, Eivind was saying, is that you could have where a caster then interprets the data where you're like, so-and-so is playing so-and-so, but, X, he's normally he has stated on stream that his worst matchup is Zerg, and that might play a psychological factor. So even though the site says,
or the two players have a history, or something like that.
Or like, or one of the players is like Haas or something, and whatever someone's normal TVP is doesn't matter right now.
So, and I think I always take this, and like I have to use this through the lens of the experiences I've had, and I always know that, for example, like horse racing, statistics is such a big thing in like horse racing and horse betting, that the idea someone will take things like what the person had for breakfast. So if someone found out data that the person ate Cheerios and he's lactose intolerant and he has to race today, that'll affect obviously data or the probability. So, I guess tying it more to this, the idea of the data itself is one layer, and then the interpretation of that data into information is a completely different human factor. And your site specifically gives that first layer for people to then interpret.
Yeah, and I think it's nice that the site sort of stops there, because that layer is at least 100% quantifiable.
Yeah.
It's difficult to quantify someone eating Cheerios when being lactose intolerant.
Sure. Sure. But another thing, something that is quantifiable, and to go with the horse racing analogy, is often you'd say, what type of track is the horse on? One thing that Aligulac doesn't do is the maps.
That's a shortcoming for sure. And I think TLPD does or did do maps.
Yeah, and I find it's often, particularly comparing player to player, it's often going to be such a small sample size that it may not be relevant. But it is something that's sometimes neat to see. But I find that the samples are almost never big enough to, like, rarely has a pro player played 30 tournament games on the same match before they switch or something, like where you could rely on it, let alone in the same matchup.
Map data seems to be one of those things I don't know why I never noticed it before, that the map type, or whether how well someone performs on large maps, small maps, X or this or a particular map, actually is something very fascinating. It didn't even dawn on me. That's why I love talking about these kind of things.
Yeah, no, for sure this is significant, and I guess I would like to say it was deliberate, but I don't think it was when I made the website to leave it out. But I think it benefited from it in the end, because it made the job of the people who enter results a lot easier.
Yeah,
and that's I think I don't say it enough, but the people who enter results to Aligulac, those are the real heroes here.
I just realized that you probably have people who put the data in.
Yeah, there's volunteers to do this, and there's really not many, and they're true champions. And one of the key sort of reasons why Aligulac, I think, was able to blossom, so to speak, was that I made it really easy to enter results. You can sit there and do that in, you know, half an hour. You could just, you can enter a ton.
Okay, so why don't we this is the perfect opportunity. Let's do a tour of the site.
Okay.
For our audience, and I'm going to ask you. There's so many questions I want to ask you now about about elements of the site. Because there's things I didn't realize. I actually, and this is obviously to my own ignorance of being born in this century, where I'm like, I just assumed it was magic. You just pull the data and you got it just magically. But obviously, there are still human hands.
I have entered some of the Toronto tournaments into the site.
Oh, really?
It takes a little bit to learn it, but yeah, it's easy once you.
Okay, so then my question is: have you ever had to review data to ward off malicious, you know, entries that may skew information? Like, how do you validate or verify information entered into the system?
We don't do a lot of this. I get trusted volunteers and I let them do their thing, and it's worked out well. I've had a couple of incidents, so to speak. One thing that very often happens is that there are players who are dissatisfied with their own, you know, reporting. Let's say there's results that they would like to get into the site that they've played, and they're not there.
That is amazing. I didn't even. They were just like, I should be higher here.
Right, and then they you know, they offer their services, you know, volunteer, like, you know, let me help enter results, you know, and then they spend their time entering their own results, and that I just doesn't sit right with me. Even if, you know, the results they enter are true, you know, it just doesn't sit right with me. So those people I prefer to not have around.
So okay, there are two things I wanted to add. So with your volunteer system, is it self-policing, or do you yourself oversee them?
I don't oversee them unless there's questions.
But who brings up the questions?
The volunteers, or I get emails.
Sounds like this looks suspicious.
Yeah, you kind of expect, I guess, you would expect most entries to be like a whole tournament or something, right? If someone just entered 8 of their own games, that should stand out like a sore thumb. Yeah.
No, there's essentially no policing at all, and I mean, I guess I'd like to try to do it, but there's just not manpower.
Right.
So the quality of the data is up for debate, I suppose.
So it's really kind of like born on the honor system.
Yeah.
Really? Huh, that's interesting to think of. Like, you know, that a lot of the community's honor system, and for the most part, you know, generally people are good natured in the sense they're going to be honest about it. But there are people who are not. So, and then to touch on the idea of, without obviously naming names, could you tell us the story of that, you know, that scenario of when someone tried to enter just their names, or even any other story of someone who was malicious? We don't have to name names, but like, I'd like to know the story and context.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's not really much to tell. And I certainly wouldn't call them malicious. These are people who, you know, they have the best interests in mind, and their philosophy, I guess, just doesn't match mine.
Okay.
But I mean, there have been, for example, people who are not pro players at all who come to me and they are involved in, let us say, the French, you know, mid scene or something like this. They go to a lot of tournaments in France, and then, you know, they collect a lot of results and they want to submit all these results. And if I do that, there's going to be a ton of French people suddenly occupying, you know, the semi-high ranks. So one thing that we've had to do is to make sure that we sort of, from the top level, the top tournaments, we go a certain distance below that, and then we stop there.
Is that weighted on prize pool attendance of players who are of that caliber? Like, what's the threshold?
I think we refuse to enter results from tournaments that fail to have a certain amount of players who are not already in the database.
Right.
Fail to have a certain amount of players already in the database, I should say.
So
well, you get the idea.
Yeah. So, but for example, 75% of the players of a tournament are not or are in the database. Do the 25% of the remaining non-database player get entered into the database?
Yeah, absolutely. They get entered.
Okay,
for sure.
And then that's why it sort of builds off each other as that's a new level of players.
Essentially, what I'm trying to ensure is that the first games of new players are against people who are established.
So and that makes a lot of sense. What about tournaments that have open brackets like DreamHack and has a whole do you cut off to like top 16 round of 32?
Yeah, we do it by round. So
okay. Yeah. Okay. I was like, because the open brackets of DreamHack would surely flood.
Absolutely.
Flood your system.
Yeah, I think those are general. I mean, there's usually enough people in that. Like, even the open brackets are like
generally players who are
they're crap like me, but then half of them are like, Soul flies in from Poland or something. So it's usually good enough. But it makes sense if you were if most of the players were new players, then they automatically get stipulated 1,000 points.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be. So then when they lose, they're 1,000 points and you've got one player that's at like 2,000.
Yeah.
That 2,000 gets to gain 5 points every bronze player they beat. And then they could feed off them
exactly
infinitely until they ended up
exactly.
until they ended up winning. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask that about when you brought up the Korean and foreigner scene. The foreigner scene has a lot more of these little things. Like, I have never seen Maru or Innovation or someone play a no-name player ever.
Not for a long time.
Right? But you will get True or someone go to Psystorm Cup and play Winter. Well, Winter is kind of
he's kind of known.
But I mean, he could play just some guy, right? Or
NYK.
You go to Cheese. He's all right too. But I mean, but someone like me, right? Like, I've played Massa, I played Scarlet, I played Neve, I played these people just in open tournaments. Well, a Korean of that level would never play a Diamond player, but North Americans do play it. And so when I enter it as 1,000 points, they get the benefit out of that. So it kind of inflates them more as well. But that's why you put in that counter of 1,200 points for a Korean.
Yeah.
I think the only time you'll ever see Koreans play a no-name player would be when GSL has the GSL Opens, and those have been few and far between. But they once in a while they occur. Usually when a new expansion is released, they do a GSL Open at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and maybe something like an Alimo League or something.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's it.
But that's almost it. But they don't have
those are also pros.
Yeah, exactly. They're still Masters 1 players, but North America, I don't know as much in Europe, but probably the same. You'd literally play a gold player at some bar or something, right? So, but you could treat the gold player ELO wise as if he was a Masters 1 player. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
I just looked up Ender Sword. That's you, right?
See, I'm there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have any. I think I do have one. Well, actually, my most recent one to one of these examples is from what do they call it? The Ducklings tournament, the one that Crank runs.
Cranky Ducklings.
Yeah, the Cranky Ducklings was the last entry I've got. So it's me with my rating of 400 against the guy that's 800. But there must be enough rated players in that tournament that it counts.
Okay, so let's do the walkthrough, and then while we're doing the walkthrough, I'm sure I have a bag of questions to go through. But Tara, why don't you pull us up the walkthrough on our, everyone else